It is a silent, heavy existential ache that compromises the internal peace of almost every modern adult as they cross into mid-adulthood. You are navigating a perfectly stable life. You have a career, a routine, and a set of real-world responsibilities. Yet, during quiet moments of isolation or late-night sleeplessness, your mind automatically wanders into a parallel reality. You begin thinking about the career path you abandoned, the relationship you walked away from, or the creative risk you refused to take years ago. Your brain constructs a hyper-vivid, idealized version of the life you could have lived, a ghost life where you are wealthier, happier, and completely fulfilled. Instead of appreciating your current reality, you find yourself experiencing a profound, visceral state of mourning for this non-existent potential. You feel a heavy sense of regret, a tightening in your chest, and a deep sorrow for a version of yourself that was never actually born. Most people look at this painful longing and assume it is a sign of basic midlife regret, ingratitude, or clinical depression. They blame themselves for being trapped in the past, assuming their mindset is defective. But the reality behind this universal human struggle has nothing to do with your current happiness or your maturity. What you are experiencing is an acute cognitive distortion known as counterfactual thinking. Your mind is not failing. Your highly evolved memory networks are simply treating a fictional concept as if it were a genuine physical tragedy. To understand why your brain forces you to mourn a life you never lived, we must dissect the neural speedways of imagined loss. To decipher the mechanical origin of this existential mourning, we must isolate the precise neurological networks that allow human beings to engage in mental time travel. This process is heavily governed by the default mode network, or the DMN, working in absolute coordination with the orbitofrontal cortex and the hippocampus. The hippocampus houses the raw, factual memories of the choices you actually made in your past. However, the orbitofrontal cortex possesses a highly unique, advanced cognitive capability. It can run complex simulations of alternate realities based on changes to those past choices. This is known as counterfactual thinking, which literally means thinking contrary to the facts. When your brain runs a counterfactual simulation, it doesn't just treat it as a passing daydream. The orbitofrontal cortex calculates the emotional value of the unchosen path and compares it directly against your current, real-world baseline. If the simulated path looks superior, it triggers an immediate, sharp neural response that closely mimics the brain's reaction to physical pain. Your survival networks do not understand that the simulation is an unearned fiction. They simply register a massive deficit between your reality and the phantom timeline, forcing your consciousness into an acute state of unprovoked grief. The true psychological gridlock of mourning your potential is driven by a severe data asymmetry in how your brain constructs real and imagined memories. When you evaluate your actual lived reality, your brain has access to an exhausting, high-resolution archive of facts. You remember the daily commute, the administrative stress, the financial anxieties, and the minor annoyances of your current career or relationship. Your reality is weighed down by the natural friction of human life. However, when your orbitofrontal cortex constructs the memory file for your unchosen ghost life, it operates with zero real-world data constraints. It strips the imagined timeline of all ordinary human friction. It does not include bad days, taxes, workplace politics, or routine boredom in the alternate reality. It builds a flawless, gold-plated fantasy where every choice you didn't make led to absolute bliss. Your analytical brain then performs an entirely rigged comparison. It takes your raw, flawed, unedited real-world reality and weighs it against this frictionless, perfect ghost. The math of your mind ensures that reality always loses. The dopamine reward pathway registers a massive negative prediction error, flooding your consciousness with a heavy sense of personal waste and inadequacy, completely unaware that it is comparing your real life to an internally manufactured illusion. The intense physical ache that accompanies this existential regret is processed by a specialized region of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC. The ACC acts as the primary error detection alarm for your central nervous system, continuously monitoring the environment to track the difference between what you expected to happen and what actually happened. When you experience a standard life mistake, like dropping a cup or taking a wrong turn, the ACC fires a microdose of electrical distress to force your brain to correct the behavior. However, when you enter mid-adulthood and realize that time is finite, your ACC applies this exact same error detection software to your entire life trajectory. It looks back at your choices and treats every unchosen path as a massive, unresolved behavioral mistake. It treats your lost potential as an active system error. The ACC fires its distress signal continuously, activating your autonomic nervous system to produce a tight sensation in your throat, muscle tension, and a physical heaviness in your chest. You are trapped in a biological feedback loop where your brain's error detection software is constantly screaming that you have made a fatal mistake, translating an abstract historical choice into a genuine somatic state of physical trauma. The transition from a passing nostalgic thought into a permanent state of existential mourning is driven by the physical activation of your primary stress pathways under the weight of regret. When your brain loops through these counterfactual timelines for hours every week, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, treats the imagined loss as a real-world tragedy. The amygdala perceives the devaluation of your current life status as an immediate survival threat, commanding your adrenal glands to continuously dump cortisol and adrenaline into your system. This chronic chemical flood alters your internal neurochemical landscape, leading to a systemic downregulation of your dopamine and serotonin receptors. Dopamine is the molecule of anticipation and forward momentum. When its pathways are choked off by chronic stress hormones, your capacity to feel excitement about your current goals or future milestones drops to zero. You enter a state of temporary anhedonia. The apathy you feel today is not an identity crisis, it is the direct consequence of a hyper-adapted nervous system that has exhausted its chemical reserves by forcing your body to physiologically mourn the death of a completely imaginary person. To fully map out this psychological loop, we must evaluate how the ghost life completely hijacks your brain's selective attention filters via the reticular activating system, or the RAS. The RAS acts as the primary gatekeeper for your consciousness, deciding which environmental details enter your active awareness and which are discarded as background noise. When your threat networks are hypersensitized to your perceived wasted potential, your RAS takes its filtering instructions directly from your internal regret. It actively scans your external environment for any data point that confirms your narrative of failure. When you see a peer succeeding in the field you abandoned, or when you read about someone taking the risk you avoided, your filtered attention instantly amplifies those examples into concrete proof that your life is structurally inferior. Conversely, when your current environment offers you profound evidence of safety, stability, and quiet victories, your brain categorizes the evidence as boring or standard, completely filtering it out. Your conscious mind never receives the objective truth of your options. You are locked inside an insulated cognitive filter where your brain actively deletes all evidence of your present security while hyper-focusing on every historical shadow, ensuring that your current reality remains an unfulfilling prison. While your selective filters are analyzing your peers for success, your medial prefrontal cortex is running an automated status calculation based on social comparison theory that completely paralyzes your current agency. Your brain calculates your social competence and belonging by running continuous simulations of your relative position within the human hierarchy. However, this comparison engine operates on a highly asymmetric dataset. You experience your own internal reality from the inside out, meaning you are intimately aware of your internal processing friction, your daily fatigue, and the messy compromises of your life. In contrast, you only experience the imagined reality of your ghost life from the outside in. You only picture the final successful milestones of that unchosen path. Your analytical brain automatically compares your raw, chaotic, unedited internal blooper reel with the golden highlight reel of your fantasy. The system detects a massive structural mismatch. It reasons that if that alternate version of you would have been naturally confident, flawless, and secure while you feel manual and exhausted, you have uniquely corrupted your potential, transforming a normal biological limitation into a personal feeling of deep psychological shame. To understand why the human brain is wired with such a volatile, painful capacity for counterfactual regret, we must leave our modern contexts and look at the brutal survival demands of our evolutionary history. The human nervous system did not evolve to cultivate personal fulfillment or self-actualization. It evolved as a raw survival engine designed to keep you alive in a highly hostile primitive world. In a prehistoric savanna, any deviation from a familiar, secure resource routine carried an immediate, statistical death sentence. If a primitive hominid chose to stay in a cave where water and food were scarce but predictable, they survived. If they took a high-stakes risk to cross a mountain range in search of a better paradise, they were highly likely to be killed by apex predators or rival tribes. Evolution fiercely selected against the hyper-adventurous risk-takers, heavily favoring the individuals whose brains developed a profound, instinctual aversion to the unknown. The status quo bias and the fear of risk kept your ancestors alive. The ghost life you mourn today is simply the collection of wild risks your ancient survival software successfully forced you to avoid years ago to ensure you didn't die. The sorrow you feel on your couch today is the biological tax you pay for an ancient safety program that functioned perfectly to keep you alive. The persistent torment of mourning your potential is also driven by an artificial neurochemical ceiling created by the clinical structure of dopamine prediction errors. Individuals trapped inside this existential loop almost always operate under a rigid cognitive framework that defines happiness as a fixed destination rather than a process of neurological adaptation. Your brain operates on the law of habituation, meaning that no matter which path you choose in life, your neurochemistry will naturally return to your set homeostatic baseline within 6 months of reaching a goal. If you had taken that abandoned career path or married that past partner, your brain would not have remained in a permanent state of high dopamine bliss. The novelty would have faded, the receptors would have downregulated, and you would be experiencing the exact same daily metabolic friction, mourning anxieties, and internal stress that you feel right now. The ghost life is a neurochemical mirage. Because your brain fails to calculate the law of habituation when projecting the past, it treats the unchosen path as an eternal fountain of dopamine, completely unaware that it is mourning a state of constant chemical satisfaction that cannot physically exist within the architecture of human flesh. The long-term danger of living inside this counterfactual time loop is the severe accumulation of allostatic load caused by maintaining a splintered consciousness. When your brain convinces you that your real life is an inferior mistake and your ghost life is your true home, it forces your prefrontal cortex to run 2 massive competing reality programs simultaneously. You have to manually force yourself to execute your real-world tasks while your background processing networks are continuously running a high-stakes simulation of your fantasy. From a neurological perspective, running this parallel processing network requires an immense, non-stop expenditure of executive energy and glucose. Over years of continuous execution, this chronic energy split completely exhausts your nervous system's buffering capacity. The high allostatic load causes a systemic downregulation of your serotonin receptors, plunging your mind into a flat, gray state of chronic mental fatigue and clinical burnout. The energy required to keep both the real world and the ghost world alive becomes so overwhelming that your resilience collapses entirely, proving that the mental energy you waste mourning your past potential eventually extracts the ultimate long-term tax, the total destruction of your present vitality. When we systematically look at this entire temporal process through a cold clinical lens, we can perform an objective somatic autopsy on our regret and completely strip it of its psychological power. The next time you look back at your choices and feel a sudden, sickening wave of grief settle into your stomach for the life you didn't live, you must instantly recognize the mechanical order of operations inside your flesh. The tight chest, the racing pulse, and the internal voice telling you that you have wasted your life are not profound emotional truths. They are not an indication that your past choices were a mistake, that you are a failure, or that your potential is permanently dead. They are simply the physical, predictable consequence of an overtaxed orbitofrontal cortex and a hyperactive error detection alarm running a high-resolution simulation inside an evolutionary brainstem that does not understand that time is a one-way street. The terrifying thoughts of failure your mind manufactures during this window are completely empty. They are nothing more than a desperate fictional script written by an energy-starved prefrontal cortex trying to find an explanation for a raw, mismatched cortisol surge in your tissues. The thoughts are not insights. They are simply the neurological exhaust produced by a high-performing engine running a false alarm loop against a ghost. Breaking the cycle of counterfactual mourning requires you to completely change how you respond to the 12-millisecond logic gap. You cannot stop your default mode network from running parallel simulations of your past. Your brain is structurally wired to calculate alternate trajectories to protect its risk profiles. Your objective is not to wait for the nostalgic thoughts to magically disappear before you feel present, but to change your relationship to the simulation. When the wave of historical regret hits your chest, you must expect the biological delay. Instead of engaging with the golden fantasy, analyzing your old choices, or criticizing your current position, your only goal is to look at the tension objectively, accept the unspent cortical energy, and say to yourself, "This is not a life failure, this is just the 12-millisecond glitch running a counterfactual loop." By removing the moral shame and the mental narrative from the sensation, you give your prefrontal cortex the time it needs to lower its error alarm, integrate your past choices, and naturally return your body to a state of calm, unpolluted presence. Thank you for watching this explanation. If you want to understand more about the silent biological mechanics that dictate our daily human struggles, consider subscribing to the channel. This library is a growing archive dedicated strictly to the deep science of why the mind and body operate this way. No trends, no shortcuts, just the objective truth of our shared biology. Explore the rest of the archive to understand your mind, and I will see you in the next breakdown.